Hello, everybody. This is Ben Johnson from the Particle Accelerator podcast, and we talk to forward-thinking leaders, how they leverage technology and accelerate business growth and value. I'm here today with Daniel. Daniel, why don't you introduce yourself?
Absolutely, Ben. So my name is Daniel Posavac. For the last 20 years, I've been working on the agency side, digital agency, both marketing, web design, and development. Last 10 years of that were in Asia, based in Singapore, where I built an agency group, which I sold 3 years ago. And now I'm working with technology and software startups, really driving growth and innovation.
Oh, that's awesome. What technology innovations are you betting on to drive your business growth or partners' business growth today?
Well, I think everybody will probably want me to say AI, but I'm too early on that, and I still haven't quite got to a point where I can bet on it, to be very honest with you. But data and just software and technology that's getting better at utilizing that data for very specific business functions. When it comes to marketing and both sales, I still believe that is the most powerful tool that we have at our disposal.
Yeah, I think we experienced a similar thing that AI is kind of this, certainly a buzzword, and its application seems very wide. But it's usually, and we've been saying this since our days in online advertising, where it's like the cherries on top of a bunch of data engineering work to bring data into one place and have it accessible. So even if you are going to use AI or some really smart data science, you still need it all in one place. You got to do all of that work. That's awesome. So what about data most interests you?
Well, I think at the moment data is becoming a lot more niche and a lot more personalized. I think the access to higher quality data is becoming easier for businesses, especially small businesses. There's a huge amount of technology available at almost either no cost or very low monthly cost that's able to drive your decision making in business. And then I think businesses are savvier now about their own customer data, so they've got more of it. And that's allowing us to understand the business better, the customer better, and make strategic decisions based on the data. We're no longer just looking at Google Analytics or a little bit of e-commerce data. A lot more is now centralized. We've got single customer views. A lot of e-commerce businesses are very savvy when it comes to that regard. So that excites me because we are now using that data not just at a surface level in terms of looking at correlation, but I think we're able to start to drive causation and personalization by going 2 or 3 layers deep and also combining it across a couple of different channels, right? And that's in marketing always been the drive, but nobody's really done it effectively until very recently. So that really excites me.
Interesting. Are there some particular tools that you're really attaching to there in that chain, or it's considering what's best for the partner?
There are definitely tools. Some of them are obviously the core ones that everybody has access to that are getting better. The new Google Analytics suite is a lot better now and a lot more powerful. Obviously, you have to invest in it a lot more. The advertising data is very powerful that comes from the core platforms, Meta and Google. So that's obviously going to be a core piece of data. And then the CRMs, depending on which CRM you're working with, HubSpot, Salesforce, and there's a bunch of other really strong CRMs out there. Those are the core pillars that we're using. But there's also a lot of research data and third-party data that's quite easily accessible, actually. So combinations of those, absolutely.
That's cool. Yeah, one of the things we're arranging right now is this like periodic table of business tools where we're kind of looking at, what are the CRMs you could choose from, and then getting into some dev tools and some data, like trying to develop like the business stack. And sounds like we need to talk to you more about that. What are the most significant gaps between your digital ambitions and realities today?
Look, I think the biggest gaps are actually in implementing some of the technology that's available into business processes, right? Like the technology is absolutely out there, but a lot of companies are still struggling to integrate that into their business processes or make significant process changes to actually enable this technology to not be just a layer on top, which is very easy to do, but actually become a systematic part of their business. That's still a challenge. Either it's inertia or the cost of doing it or the change of legacy systems. I know you guys have a lot of experience with that. I mean, we still see that a lot. There are legacy systems that are so baked in that even though there are fantastic technologies available at a pretty low cost, the cost of change seems more expensive than it is, and that's still the biggest barrier. There are still some really strong and large organizations that we work with that are using some very antiquated systems and technologies, and they're just scared to move away from them, or the hurdle is too big.
Yeah, do you find that like having the data is one challenge, like getting the data from the systems all into one place? We certainly tackle that challenge quite often.
Mm.
But then the ability to trigger decisions off that without, you know, three meetings and a bunch of decision makers to figure out like what is the cause and effect or what. Um, I also find that the data is not leading enough. It's not a lead. Oh, something bad happened. Now we're reacting to that, trying to claw it back. Are there any like leading indicators that you know have just surprised you that showed some kind of value? And I might be surprising you with that.
No, I mean we're finding the same challenges. I think a lot of time data is still used as a reporting tool,
Mm-hmm.
after the fact. And I think that's a huge miss and a big opportunity because a lot of this data is live. Having it as a report 7 days or 30 days later on a monthly basis is almost a waste. It's almost useless, right? And so I think that is still one of the key things that we are seeing. Even if the data is good, it's used as a dashboard or a report, and sometimes no action is taken, or very macro level strategic discussions are held, but day-to-day processes are not changed. Front-facing experiences are not necessarily changed, even though data suggests that it should be, right? And I think depending on the size of the business, a lot of those touch points are still not talking to each other. So even though the web data is saying one thing and maybe the e-commerce data is saying another thing and the CRM data is saying something else, they're not being connected, right? They're still looked at in isolation. So trying to bridge those is still a big challenge where we spend a lot of our time.
Yeah, attribution is a
Absolutely.
huge thing. Yeah, what channel did it come from?
Yeah.
Um, and what are the leading indicators up funnel? That's awesome. How do you line those activities with the overall business strategy? Really, our typical question is how do you align technology roadmaps with overall business strategy? But maybe you want to take that in a different direction.
No, I think it's a very, very important question. I think a lot of times the technology is looked at from a technology's perspective and then tried to be connected back into the business, right? And you try to reverse engineer where it might fit in your existing stack or in your existing set of business processes, which I think is absolutely the wrong way around. Business strategy should be done as a focus for the business up front, and then technology should be brought up to that point based on what the strategy calls for. And there's a lot of technologies that can do that, right? Like a lot of times organizations have a set of technologies in mind or already have purchased them, and then you have to reverse engineer how they fit in or how they work together,
Right.
right? And so I think that that is when you're looking at digital transformation, which has been ongoing for 20 years now, but most companies are still either at the early stages or in the middle processes of that. We're trying to look at what are the low hanging fruits to actually deliver on the business strategy and to make the highest level of impact. If you can't change the entire plumbing system or the entire foundation or infrastructure, what are the ones that are going to make a difference to the strategy? What is the strategy calling for? And then how do you implement those into the actual business processes, not just from a reporting perspective or from an advertising perspective, which is pretty easy to do.
Right, that's really cool. We often talk about the high need, high value paradigm where like I really need this to run my business. Like I'm gonna need compute. I'm gonna
Yeah.
need some place to hold data. I'm gonna
Yeah.
need so let's partner with a cloud provider.
Yeah.
And then we have this kind of middle layer where let's continue to partner, but we need to heavily configure.
Mm.
And then we talk about a top layer, usually the same layer that's integrating with your customer
Yeah.
that is best custom. I find a lot of mistakes when we kind of rush to solve those problems and maybe take something off the shelf and put it in front of the customer. And we can only get so far with configuration. And that's really where we come in and look at that customer experience and the customer journey to find out really how we can focus there. And I think when we show folks that, then we can focus on the right layers of things and then make stage appropriate decisions. It sounds like what you were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I've spent the last 20 years mostly on the marketing front line of that, so the consumer facing pieces, a lot of that first party data through web, social, and advertising. And I still find that much of the time that's looked at in complete isolation from either the sales funnel or the actual customer lifetime value and the purchase process and everything that happens once the customer is onboarded, right? And that to me is probably the biggest gap that we're still seeing. A little bit easier for e-commerce businesses because that's quite closely connected. But when you're looking at enterprise or when you look at any business that's maybe not directly selling online but generating leads online, I still think that's a big challenge.
Yeah, that's cool. So what lessons have you learned from tech initiatives that failed to deliver expected value?
Look, I think the biggest challenge that we see and the biggest lessons that we've learned is don't build something that's going to take 6 to 12 months to give results and to kind of actually be ready to go, right? Any project that's going to take 6 to 12 months to actually go live is probably going to be behind that time once it's actually live, you know? So those are very, very heavy pieces of machinery, and they have to be done alongside some kind of more stagnant and stage things that are going to provide benefits straight away, right? So look for things that you can implement quickly, even if they maybe give you 70, 80, 90% of what you need, but have that instant impact, and then build on top of that rather than going in and saying, hey, we're going to do this from the ground up and it's going to be ready in 6 to 12 months. And then by the time you get there, something's gotten in the way or delayed it or something's changed and you're kind of back to the drawing board. So that's a big lesson that we've learned.
Yeah, and I bet you learned that lesson even before the venture market was as tight as it is now.
Mm.
So now even more so, that I remember in the, 10, 15 years ago, bootstrapping was this huge
Mhm.
culture where a lot of folks would even talk about, writing an ebook or something if you had an idea, just validating your market
Mm.
in something small,
Yeah.
but finding the 90-day solution
Mhm.
that can get you into the market, talking to customers, and then iterating from there. No big bangs.
Absolutely, especially considering the state of the venture market at the moment, right? I think we're all familiar with building minimum viable products, right? But I think minimum viable businesses are more important than ever. Not investing a huge amount of capital and time into an idea that hasn't got a fit or hasn't had a test or hasn't kind of found that level of input or insight from the customer. I think right now the luxury of doing that is probably disappearing or has disappeared, right? So I think it's more critical than ever.
Yeah, that's awesome. How do you cultivate a culture of innovation and digital fluency in your own organization and with partners?
Mm. I think, look, inside agencies, marketing, web, tech, digital agencies, it's a necessity. It's not something you can kind of even think about. It has to be on the front line because you're constantly up against other suppliers or competitors that are pitching new ideas to your customers, right? So that is it's not so much a culture as an actual need state and a role within every agency for somebody to continuously test new technologies and be at the cusp of that so that we can then take it to our clients and partners. I think when we look at the sort of technology sector, looking at startups and businesses, there it's a little bit different because everyone's running 1,000 miles an hour building a product or several products. You do have to have a you do have to have a champion of that. You do have to have a place in the leadership conversation for innovation and looking at what it's doing. I find it easy to do at events. I think events are really good for that. Spending time on ground at events like South by Southwest, where I was just at. Um, you feel and hear and see a lot, and you take that in. And then, as long as you're actually working through that and actually not just taking it in and then forgetting about it, you start to actually see its impact, right? So, making sure that we are consistent in being on that front line, I think, is really important.
Cool. Was there something particular that you just surprised you at South by Southwest? Something that kind of grabbed your attention?
I mean, it was obviously AI full. I don't think there was a single conversation that didn't have those words in there. But that wasn't exactly a surprise. I think the fact that there are still quite a lot of D2C startups and businesses scaling and running well was quite a surprise, to be very honest with you. It's a challenging space right now.
Mhm.
So I thought that was quite interesting. And I think there's just going back to some core businesses, right? It's not only the sexy AI-led stuff that's, I think, a year or two ago was just blowing up. Now I think some of the core businesses that are less sexy but are profitable are starting to pop up again and be interesting to people. So that was quite a surprise.
Yeah, if you made it into million in ARR with a SaaS-based business before the venture market got constrained, you were still functional, and it's good to see that you saw that validation. Um,
Yeah.
that's awesome. Um, I used to ask what was like an advice, but I don't like advice. I started asking more. Is there a shared experience that you would share with people who are starting their digital transformation journey, or maybe even young in their digital career?
Look, absolutely, probably the most important thing is that acceptance of change being constant. This is still probably one of the fastest changing industries around, and it doesn't stop, right? So you can never get comfortable that you have a structure or a stack or a platform or a set of technologies that are going to take you a long way out, because a long way out is very difficult to see, right? So that's probably the first piece, and that's a mentality, right? Like being comfortable with that uncomfortable nature of the constant change.
Right.
It sounds like, okay, yeah, that's a given, but it's difficult. Like when you're in there running a business and every single year you're constantly having to kind of rethink everything and challenge every notion within that business, that starts to get tiring, right? So having the right people around you to help you do that, being mentally prepared for that, that's probably my biggest advice to people, because that's just the way that our space is going to be. And then finding a really good community and network of people in and around your business, right? Not maybe necessarily directly involved as clients, investors, or partners, but just colleagues, friends, and people that you can bounce ideas off and get inspiration from has been hugely valuable for me.
Awesome. And one final question. I've always admired your personal discipline and your mindset. Is there Can you just share with folks, especially those young in their career folks, what kind of mindsets or any guiding principles that are driving you? Because I find you to be a top performer at anything you set your intention towards. Are there any guiding principles that you would share with the folks just trying to do better?
Well, thank you, first of all. But
Sure.
I think for me, the joy in exploration and learning has been probably maybe one of my biggest strengths. I genuinely love that we are in a space and we have the opportunity to constantly challenge norms and explore new things and learn new things. So that is probably where my drive and discipline comes from, because I genuinely find this just a huge personal blessing and advantage that we get to do this, right? So I love that. I love that side of it. In and around that, I think having a good structure, again, good partners and good network, that's really important. A lot of things that seem like individuals are doing themselves, it's actually a group of people and a network of people. And I've certainly built my business and my career based on a really strong network of friends, who I work with very closely. And I think that gives me a lot of discipline, right? Like that makes me accountable, that challenges me, that makes sure that someone's always looking at what I'm doing, and vice versa, and saying, hey, does that make sense? Is that right? So entrepreneurship, business can be a lonely journey. So that is a big piece of advice. If you don't have that, try and find that, get out there and network, meet a lot of people. I've definitely found in our industry all over the world, making connections and building relationships can be done. It's not difficult. I think everybody wants to find similar characters, similar mindsets, similar personalities. So if you go out there and spend enough time networking and meeting people, you're going to find that group.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
to me, that's really, honestly, if I can give any piece of advice, it's find that.
No, that's really great. I within the past couple of years, as revenue has increased, like not everybody can do this when they're early,
Mm.
but even when you're early, you can do like a version of this. So like I'm in two mastermind groups and have a CEO coach,
Mm-hmm.
and just like I don't have all the answers, and I've
Yeah.
also found that operating by my own understanding, especially when I'm headed into new territory, is like the recipe for an expensive tuition payment, in a hard lesson learned. Um, but just looking at folks that are in your network to ask
Yeah.
about critical decisions and stuff can save you a bundle.
Man, I can really relate to that. And what I've learned as well is you will not know who can help you if you don't ask. I've
Mm.
made the mistake of not asking some people that I could have for advice when I really should have asked them. They were there and available, but I decided to go at it alone and made some big mistakes and costly ones. And in hindsight, I had at my disposal people who could have picked up the phone and they would have certainly given me time, advice, and guidance that would have been very helpful at the time. So do ask. And I think now with podcasting especially, there's communities that are built around that, right? And so you don't have to spend a lot of money to go to the events to meet people and talk to people in those circles, right? You can
Hmm.
do that at the local level. You can do it online. You can do it through what was Twitter and is now X, and you can get a lot of fantastic advice through those channels. So there's always a place to start.
Yeah, that's great. Well, this has been great. I really appreciate your time, Daniel. Thanks so much for doing this with me, and we just look forward to hearing what you do in the future.
Always a pleasure, Ben.
All right,
Thank you.
thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.